What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 7. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over each position and break down a couple of my favorite players for this NFL DFS main slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Oh, and good news, guys. Make sure to stay tuned to the very end of this video because we removed the box that was popping up and blocking the lineup. So now you can see a full lineup using these picks that we made in this video if you stay to the very end. Okay, guys, NFL Week 7. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So my favorite quarterback on the slate, the stud of the slate, in a fantastic matchup, in a high-scoring game, in a close, competitive game. Doesn't get any better than this one. I like Patrick Mahomes from the Kansas City Chiefs playing the Tennessee Titans, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the second most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes has averaged 28.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.3 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 13% owned, projected at 29.1 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's $8,400 DraftKings salary, $400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 57 points scored in this game, with the Kansas City Chiefs favored by 5. So this game should be within a touchdown. It's a super high scoring game, fantastic matchup. If there was ever a week to pay up and play Patrick Mahomes, this is the week. So I like Patrick Mahomes here versus the Tennessee Titans. Okay, now I also like Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers playing the Washington football team, who have the absolute worst defense overall. They give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers has averaged 20.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 2.3 rush attempts per game, and he's only going to be about 2% owned. So I think that ownership is way too low. He's projected at 21.6 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's $7,500 DraftKings salary, $400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 48.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 8. So you got a fantastic matchup here, and Aaron Rodgers has been super consistent, scoring 24 fantasy points in each of the last 3 games. Pretty funny how he scored exactly 24 fantasy points 3 games in a row. So I like Aaron Rodgers' chances of putting up 22 plus fantasy points in this one at low ownership. And we know he's got a super high ceiling, so he could be a slate breaker if Patrick Mahomes doesn't deliver and Aaron Rodgers is the guy that goes out there and throws 300 yards for 3 plus touchdowns. So I like Aaron Rodgers here versus the Washington football team. Okay, I also like Matthew Stafford from the LA Rams playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 6th worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford has averaged 24.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3 rush attempts per game. He's going to be about 13% owned, projected at 25.3 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's $7,100 DraftKings salary, $1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Rams favored by 15.5. So this is a high-scoring game. The only risk here is that the Rams get out to a big lead and it turns into a running game script where Matthew Stafford is not forced to throw the ball. So I would actually prefer Aaron Rodgers a little bit more over Matthew Stafford just to get the lower ownership, the better matchup. And I think Aaron Rodgers has a bigger ceiling in this game this week, but I still do like Matthew Stafford here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So, of course, Derrick Henry, he's the stud. I don't even need to talk about him. He's averaged 30.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting monster volume, an average of 27 rush attempts per game, and 3 pass targets per game. That's 30 touches per game. Just unbelievable what this guy's doing this season. So he's $9,200 DraftKings salary, and he's $1,800 more on FanDuel. But this is a high-scoring game, so don't ignore Derrick Henry. But moving on from Derrick Henry, let's take a look at the other running back. If you want to save a ton of salary here, take a look at Darrell Henderson Jr. from the LA Rams playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Darrell Henderson Jr. has averaged 18.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16.2 rush attempts per game and 3.2 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 79% of the snaps, and that's super high for a running back, and he's going to be about 17% owned. Oh, Derrick Henry is going to be about 18% owned. So these are going to be the top 2 owned running backs this week, and for good reason. Darrell Henderson Jr., he's projected at 18.1 fantasy points here in Week 7, and he's only $6,600 DraftKings salary. He's $1,400 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 50.5 points scored in this game, with the Rams favored by 15.5. So it's that Vegas point total, or the Vegas line, favoring the Rams by 15.5, that makes me want to play Darrell Henderson Jr. instead of Matthew Stafford, because he's got the best possible running back matchup here, and this could turn into a running game script pretty quick. Darrell Henderson Jr. should get over 20 touches in this game, but he could get 25 plus touches in this one, and he scored 25 fantasy points last week off of 21 rush attempts and 3 pass targets. So Darrell Henderson Jr. is set up for a possible monster game, and his salary is pretty decent here. So I like Darrell Henderson Jr. here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay guys, it's time to announce the winner of our $25 weekly PayPal giveaway. And the winner is Tyler Banks. Tyler Banks, congratulations. You are the winner of this week's $25 PayPal giveaway. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy, and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video. So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Now I also like Leonard Fournette from the Tampa Bay Bucks playing the Chicago Bears, who have a good defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Leonard Fournette has averaged 16.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 13 rush attempts per game and 5 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 11% owned, projected at 16.9 fantasy points here in Week 7. He's $6,400 DraftKings salary, $600 more on FanDuel, and Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, with the Tampa Bay Bucks favored by 12.5. So Leonard Fournette, he's in a similar spot as Darrell Henderson Jr. because the Tampa Bay Bucks should get out to a big lead in this game, and this one could turn into a running game script. And Leonard Fournette, his touches have gone up the past 3 weeks. He's gotten 22, 12, and 20 rush attempts the past 3 weeks, on top of 6, 5, and 5 pass targets. So he's getting 20 touches or more. He's got 28 touches last week. So he's getting a ton of volume, and he's been producing, scoring 31, 21, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Leonard Fournette here versus the Chicago Bears. Okay, so another running back that I like is Cordell Patterson from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Miami Dolphins, who have the second worst defense overall. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Cordell Patterson, he's averaged 20.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.2 rush attempts per game and 6.2 pass targets per game. So he's going to be about 5% owned, projected at 14.9 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $6,300 DraftKings salary, $1,700 more on FanDuel. So I don't really like that FanDuel price very much, but I like that DraftKings price. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Atlanta Falcons favored by 2. So you got a close, competitive game. And Cordell Patterson Jr., he got 14 rush attempts last week and 9 pass targets. So that's a ton of volume. Now, the one thing to consider is that Calvin Ridley is going to be back this game. It may eat into his target share a little bit, but Cordell Patterson is a super explosive player. They use him out of the backfield, throw those passes. He can go out, line up as a wide receiver. And this guy's super fast, so he only needs a little bit of space to take it the distance. So that's why I like this play. I've been on Cordell Patterson for the past 3 weeks, and he scored 18, 35, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 weeks. And actually, yeah, I took him in his breakout game 4 games ago, where he scored 24 fantasy points, and he's done nothing but produce since then. So I think they're going to continue to use this guy. They're going to give him rush attempts. They're going to give him pass targets. He's going to get plenty of touches, even with Calvin Ridley back. And he's got a great matchup. I just think he's still a little bit underpriced and a little bit under-owned because of how explosive he is. He's got a huge ceiling. So I like Cordell Patterson here versus the Miami Dolphins. Okay, another running back that I like is Josh Jacobs from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Philadelphia Eagles, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Josh Jacobs has averaged 14.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 13.5 rush attempts per game and 3.3 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 10% owned, projected at 14.3 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $6,200 DraftKings salary, $700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, with the Raiders favored by 2.5. So pretty high scoring game here, at a close, competitive game, and a good running back matchup. So I think this is a good play here because Josh Jacobs is now fully healthy. There was a couple of weeks that he was out. Then he had those couple of weeks as he was getting back into the swing of things. But now he got 16 rush attempts last week, 1 pass target. So I could see him getting 20 plus touches in this game. And he scored 15 and 17 fantasy points the last 2 weeks. So his production is ticking up. So I like Josh Jacobs here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So I like DJ Moore from the Carolina Panthers playing the New York Giants, who have the 3rd worst defense overall. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. DJ Moore has averaged 19.4 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's getting an average of 10.5 pass targets per game and he's even getting a rush attempt pretty much every game. So that adds to his fantasy production a little bit. And he's on the field for 85% of the snaps. He's going to be about 13% owned, projected at 17.8 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 7,100 DraftKings salary, 600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 43 points scored in this game, with the Panthers favored by 2.5. So not a high scoring game here, but this is a great matchup in a close competitive game. And the reason that I like this pick is because DJ Moore has one of the best cornerback wide receiver matchups on the slate. If you log into Draft Dashboard and you click this link from the news that we post on the homepage, this is the wide receiver cornerback matchups, and you can see the best wide receiver cornerback matchups for the week, and DJ Moore is listed right there at the top. He's going to be matched up against James Bradbury, who's giving up 0.46 fantasy points per route. So he's just got a fantastic matchup this week, and we know he's got a huge ceiling. He scored 12, 9, and 35 fantasy points the last 3 games. He got 13 pass targets and 1 rush attempt last game. So I think he's going to have a great week here in such a good matchup. So I like DJ Moore here versus the New York Giants. Okay, now I also like Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have a good defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Brandon Cooks has averaged 16.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 9.5 pass targets per game, and he's going to be about 9% owned. He's on the field for 87% of the snaps, projected at 14.5 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 6,000 DraftKings salary, 500 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, and they have the Texans trailing by 17.5. So he's got a good wide receiver matchup, and this is just a passing game script all game long. He's going to get a ton of pass targets in this one. He got 13 pass targets last game, put up 18 fantasy points, and I think he also has a really good, he's got a nice cornerback matchup here, matched up against Marco Wilson, who's giving up 0.48 fantasy points per route run against. So Brandon Cooks is in a great spot this week. So I like Brandon Cooks here versus the Arizona Cardinals.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Okay, now I think this is my favorite wide receiver play on the slate. I don't know if I'm just overreacting a little bit from his last week's performance, but I'm just feeling really good about this play, especially because his salary is still low, and I think his ownership is still pretty low too. So I like Jalen Waddle from the Miami Dolphins playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 9th worst defense overall. They give up the 9th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Jalen Waddle has averaged 14.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.3 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 81% of the snaps. He's going to be about 6% owned, projected at 13.6 fantasy points here in week 7. He's 5,600 DraftKings salary, only 300 more on FanDuel. So I like that price on both sites. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Dolphins trailing by 2. So good matchup here
close, competitive game, and Jalen Waddle had a breakout game. He scored 29 fantasy points off of 13 pass targets last week. So I hope I'm not overreacting on this pick, but I think they're going to force feed this guy the ball. I think he's going to see double-digit pass targets. He's talented. He can go the distance. He can catch those long bombs. And he's still low salary and still relatively low ownership at only 6%. So I like Jalen Waddle here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Another wide receiver that I like, you want to save some salary in your lineup, take a look at Darnell Mooney from the Chicago Bears playing the Tampa Bay Bucks, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 7th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Darnell Mooney has averaged 10.9 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 6.5 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 88% of the snaps. He's going to be about 10% owned, projected at 12 fantasy points here in week 7. He's only $4,600 DraftKings salary. He's $1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47 points scored in this game, and they have the Chicago Bears trailing by 12.5. So this is a good wide receiver matchup, and this is going to be a passing game script as the Chicago Bears play from behind. And Darnell Mooney, he scored 16, 7, and 22 fantasy points in the last 3 weeks off of 8, 5, and 7 pass targets. So I like Darnell Mooney here versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. Okay, now if you're looking to save a ton of salary at this position, take a look at Rashad Bateman from the Baltimore Ravens playing the Cincinnati Bengals, who have a good defense overall. They've been good versus opposing wide receivers, but Rashad Bateman, he just got off the IR. He put in his first full week last week, scored 7 fantasy points off of 6 pass targets. He was on the field for 100% of the snaps, so I thought that was interesting. With Sammy Watkins out, he's going to get plenty of pass targets. He's a talented wide receiver. He's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 10 fantasy points here in week 7. And I like this pick because he's only $3,400 DraftKings salary. He's $1,900 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 46 points scored in this game, with the Baltimore Ravens favored by 6.5. So I think this guy makes a ton of sense. Low salary. He's going to get plenty of targets. I think he's got pretty big upside for his price point. So I like Rashad Bateman here versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. I like Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders playing the Philadelphia Eagles, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Darren Waller has averaged 14.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.8 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 89% of the snaps. He's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 15.8 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $6,700 DraftKings salary, only $100 more on FanDuel. So I like that FanDuel price. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 49 points scored in this game, with the Raiders favored by 2.5. So pretty high scoring game here. Good tight end matchup. Darren Waller, he's due for a breakout game. Only 5 pass targets last week. So I think that's going to change this week. I think he's going to have double-digit pass targets and put up a monster game. And you're getting him at a pretty reasonable price tag, especially on FanDuel. So I like Darren Waller here versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Another tight end that I like is Kyle Pitts from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Miami Dolphins, who have the 2nd worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Kyle Pitts has averaged 12.8 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7.2 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 74% of the snaps. He's only going to be about 3% owned, so I think that ownership is way too low for Kyle Pitts. and he's projected at 12.7 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $5,900 DraftKings salary and only $200 more on FanDuel. So I love that FanDuel price. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Falcons favored by 2. So Kyle Pitts had a breakout game last game, got 10 pass targets, scored 30 fantasy points. Now, Calvin Ridley is going to be back this game, but I still expect Kyle Pitts to get plenty of pass targets. So I like Kyle Pitts here versus the Miami Dolphins. Okay, now if you want to save some salary at the tight end position, take a look at Mike Gesicki from the Miami Dolphins playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 9th worst defense overall. They're middle of the pack defending opposing tight ends. Mike Gesicki has averaged 12.2 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 7 pass targets per game. He's going to be about 6% owned, projected at 11.2 fantasy points here in week 7. He's $4,700 DraftKings salary, $1,300 more on FanDuel. So I'd rather play Kyle Pitts on FanDuel, but Mike Gesicki is interesting on DraftKings because you're going to save some salary there. Mike Gesicki, he didn't start the season out very well, but he's been coming through the past few games. He scored 23, 8, and 17 fantasy points in the last 3 games, off of 9, 7, and 6 pass targets. So I like Mike Gesicki here versus the Atlanta Falcons.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smickety smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.